And the Bruiser.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Wizard and the Bruiser. I'm Holden McNeely, and I might be a wizard.
And I'm Jake Young, and heretofore known as the Bruiser.
You're so big and strong and mean, Jake.
I will shove people for looking at my girlfriend, which I have. Guys,
All right, you don't need to let everybody know that you
okay,
have a girlfriend. You know what? All right, fine. I also have a girlfriend, Jake. Is that what we need to tell the people
Marcus
right now?
has guys. It gets better.
I have a girlfriend.
Kids,
As well.
Kids,
If you think to yourself, "There's no way I'm ever going to get a girlfriend," I'm 34. I live in an alleyway. I'm missing most of my limbs.
I didn't kiss a girl until I was 19 years old, and I don't think a girl saw my penis until I was more like 20.
A girl still hasn't seen mine, but that's because it's real fast.
That is, I heard, yeah.
Zippy.
The jumpy boy, as it's called in certain street slangs.
Before we get to part 2 of our landmark multi-part Alan Moore retrospective, I just want to say thank you so much to the fans right now. We've been in the top 200 on iTunes comedy charts.
Woo!
It's incredible. The fan group on Facebook has been so supportive and amazing.
I'm loving the Facebook fan group. We're talking right now about Pokemon, and speaking of which, I think our own episode kind of got me to go out to GameStop on Friday and pick up my copy of Pokemon Sun. Mm-hmm. And every time I hear a fan say, "Hey, your episode got me watching The Simpsons again. Your episode got me to pick up Overwatch," it's like the greatest feeling in the world. So thank you so much for all the kind words.
However, whatever joy you get listening to our just horrifically moist voices, whatever love you send back is just filling our hearts with a splendiferous joy.
It's making me fucking do a jig down the street and fucking kiss every priest I see. So, Jake, today we're continuing part 2 of our first 2-parter about Alan Moore.
Yeah, he was the man so prolific. We were sputtering facts, and it still could not even scratch the surface.
My head is spinning from the extra research that I just did earlier today. I mean, every single work that man made, and I've read a lot of it, is just so full of content, of just stuff, of just little details that it's just like hurts the mind. The mind melts, Marcus, my mind.
I'm aware of the mind melting.
I've been listening to interviews and quotes, and I've been immersed in Alan Moore world so much. I feel like I'm 14 again. Alan Moore, the 63-year-old man, is like the cool 14-year-old that discovered like punk rock, anarchy, the occult, and like slasher films, but just like continuing to evolve into the perfect being. Just this dour, just witty guy that is just like exploded and expanded upon ideas his entire life.
And we'll talk about what he's been up to a little bit now, but it's even weird to acknowledge that he's still a man in the present that makes things, because he feels like this timeless mage that like doesn't exist in my dimension.
You have to listen to more British talk shows. He is alive, he gets drunk, and has a cheeky sense of humor.
Okay, there you go.
Cheeky.
So last week we left off at The Watchmen, and we really wanted to spend a lot more time with it, so I'm really happy we did cut ourselves off then. Let's just dig right in. The work begun on it in 1986. It's a Cold War mystery, imagining that what the world would be like if a costume heroes had existed since the 1940s. They got illustrator Dave Gibbons, who co-created and illustrated one of my favorite Alan Moore one-offs, which was Mogo Doesn't Socialize, which we talked about, the Green Lantern short story we talked about last week. And the BBC described it as the moment comic books grew up.
Yes, although Alan Moore will often point out that despite all the headlines, it was always, bam, kablow, comic books grow up. I mean, all right, so if you haven't read this, I think we can unequivocally say read it. Like, please. It still holds up to this day.
And if you're not a comic book person even, I would say, hey, check it out. Just pick this one up. This is the one I gave to my brother who does not read comic books. This is the one I think I tried to get my dad to read. I mean, it's just the one, to try to say, hey, the comics can sort of have this deeper thing happening in them, the sophistication that and they are an argument. There's an argument to be made for them as great works of literature.
One of the hallmarks, besides the plot and characters, which are incredibly memorable, is the way that this is a uniquely comic book based story.
Yes.
That the way that the panels are laid out, the way that the word bubbles are placed, the color choices, everything about this book can only exist as a comic book. Everything is enhanced and complemented by its very form factor.
Yes, the illustrator Gibbons even talks about that. As it progressed, Watchmen became, this is a quote from him, as it progressed, Watchmen became much more about the telling than the tale itself. The main thrust of the story essentially hinges on what is called a MacGuffin, a gimmick. So really the plot itself is of no great consequence. It just really isn't the most interesting thing about Watchmen. As we actually came to tell the tale, that's where the real creativity came in. And I absolutely agree with that. And I have to say, it's not, the movie is fine, but it's not the reason for the season. Like, it's not, you're not going to get what we're talking about right now from that movie. You have to read the comic book.
The thing about the movie, which I kind of got the most out of, was I remember watching it in the midnight premiere and like being blown away because so many scenes are like actual panels from Watchmen,
which is super cool. I did appreciate that,
and on the screen, and that was like thrilling and fascinating and nostalgic and wonderful. And then I watched it a second time and fell asleep because it was like all the good parts were just the bits from the comic books.
Right.
They made changes to the plot, like they did all sorts of things.
They had that corny fuck scene. Remember the corny fuck scene, Jack?
Hallelujah.
Oh God, I forgot that.
Hallelujah.
How could you forget?
I just blocked it out, Marcus. It was such a just like, man.
Night Owl's penis.
So I guess we'll talk a little bit about this gimmicky plot, though, for a second, because I think it is quite fascinating and an interesting take. As usual, Alan Moore is taking a spin on the classic superhero form, examining it in a certain kind of way, trying to sort of bust it open and shed a new light on the superhero legacy, while also picking apart history and sort of delving into the details within history to kind of give us deeper truths. So, a quote from him on how he kind of came up with this. He said, I suppose I was just thinking that'd be a good way to start a comic book. Have a famous superhero found dead. As the mystery unraveled, we would be led deeper and deeper into the real heart of this superhero's world and show a reality that was very different to the generic public image of the superhero.
Again, this is another thing that you always, for context, besides Dark Knight Returns, this true deconstruction of the superhero, of showing these larger-than-life figures as flawed, broken people, sometimes triumphant, sometimes defeated, was incredibly refreshing. It was shocking almost.
And it almost would have been cooler. What he originally wanted to do was take a real superhero team that existed and then turn them and twist them and fuck them all up. DC had just acquired a line of characters from the Charlton comics. He wanted to use them for this, like instead of the comedian, which of course in the Watchmen they're all made up superheroes that feel like superheroes you've been reading for years, which they did such a good job of instilling that, and to the point where at points I was like, are these real superheroes that I just don't like know about back when I was reading it? But originally he made a proposal to take the comic superheroes that they had just the properties that they had just acquired and make the story about them. But DC was like, yeah, we just paid a lot of money for all these superhero properties. We're not just going to let you turn them into alcoholics. And
no, it'll be brilliant. You'd imagine Captain Atom, just dick swinging in the wind, while Blue Beetle just jerks off in a corner.
And they're all assholes. They're all total assholes. Yeah.
Johnny Bullet dead in a gutter. I forgot whoever the comedian was supposed to be. That was like, but yeah, some of the characters are still active in the DC universe.
Interesting.
But, yeah, like Night Owl's definitely supposed to be Blue Beetle with his gadgets and spaceship. Dr. Manhattan's definitely supposed to be Captain Atom. Rorschach is supposed to be the Question with his blanked out face and fedora.
Yeah. Question's the shit. I love the
What's
Question.
the deal with the Question?
The Question is a detective who has a face mask that it makes his face completely and totally blank, or her face completely and totally blank. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because there was a new Question a few years back. Rene Montoya.
There was a question.
Yeah.
Did they not just grab the genitals and see what there was down there? That's my solution.
That was not what the question was.
It's like, hey, stop it. That's what the Question always says when old Holdy Bear's around. Bit of a grabsies, but only with consent. So to our viewers at home. He was also inspired by Mad Magazine, of all things. The classic Mad Magazine spoof, Super Duper Man, which appeared in issue number 4 of Mad Magazine, actually would be the sort of set the mark for all Mad Magazine parodies moving forward. And just as an example, it twisted Superman in the sense like Clark Bent was using his X-ray vision not to help like solve crimes, but to peer into a woman's bathroom, let's say. So Moore wanted to kind of do that sort of thing with superheroes, but in a total 180-degree dramatic situation.
I just keep thinking about all the clever little bits that really make you stand back and go like, this was a deliberate effort by very creative people. Like the fact that Dr. Manhattan, this godlike figure who can like rearrange the molecules of the universe to his will, throughout the book, as you travel through time, because there's lots of flashbacks, you can see like how he gets nakeder and nakeder the less he gives a shit about humanity.
Right.
So like by the time he's in the Vietnam War, he's in a Speedo, but like, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
As it flashes back and forth, Rorschach, his word balloons get like more decrepit and like and bent and twisted the more like horrible street crime he's exposed to. Where in flashbacks he's like, come on fellas, we need to form a new superhero team.
Yeah, and then he finds a little girl's bones in a stove.
It was all about the little minute visual details for both Gibbons and Alan Moore, and Moore even cited William Burroughs as a huge influence, actually, because he had a comic book called The Unspeakable Mr. Hart. It appeared in the British underground magazine Cyclops, and apparently it just was filled with repeated symbols that would become laden with meaning, which led to the things like the smiley face with the blood on it and things like that. And you'll see smiley faces all throughout, and the smiley face with the blood became a symbol for almost the whole thing in itself.
Smiley faces, watches, the pirate comic that is kind of just thrown into the Curse of the Black Freighter.
Tales of the Black Freighter.
Tales of the Black Freighter.
Comic within the comic, which would come to symbolize many of the different struggles that the characters were going through.
It's operatic. These are motifs. These are recurring themes. Like, this is the kind of shit that, like, when you were reading and writing book reports in high school, you were like, I don't care. But it's there in a comic book, and this was the work of a lot of collaboration.
Yes.
This was an English team. Alan Moore, when they were kind of under the gun, would physically put typewritten pages into a taxi cab and send it 50 miles south to get to Dave Gibbons. Dave Gibbons' family, he enlisted his wife and children to help draw up 9x9 panel grids because they were so under the wire to get this thing out.
They were so like behind the time. And I mean, talk about detail. Apparently these scripts were just so filled to the brim with detail. Like there was just, these are full written, typed out pages, like massive amounts of notes. And he was giving them at one point when they were getting so behind in schedule. Yes, it was only a few pages at a time. And then Gibbons would literally call him up and say, feed me more. And it was just like this intense fucking thing,
One of my favorite quotes from Dave Gibbons about the creation of The Watchmen was that he would get these like massive chunks of story and like all these meticulously arranged panels where, individual pieces of clothing and items on a desk would be described. And it would fill like one panel would fill up an entire page. And Alan would just write as the last line, or do whatever works best.
I was always told this from my buddy Jason Kephart, and I don't know if it's actually true, but it was he said something to me about, like, in V for Vendetta, he was communicating with the illustrator, and he was like talking about how V had his back to the frame, but he was like looking, he had a look of like menace on his face or something like that, like describing the look on his face, even though he's not, you couldn't see his actual face. And anyways, it was just one of those weird, like, apparently he just gave crazy amounts of notes and had a crazy amount of detail to communicate. And even Gibbons himself would include bits of symbolism and hide things in the imagery that Alan Moore himself did not discover until a fifth or sixth reading of the comic book. So they were even just throwing stuff in there that the other one wasn't even aware of. That's just how thick this thing was, and they always wrote the whole thing as a piece to be reread many times to gain a deeper meaning. And I know I've gone through it, I think 3 times probably, and I know I've gained more out of each subsequent reading of it.
The look of the book is also incredibly unique. It's kind of common knowledge that in classic 4-color comics printing, heroes will have bright primary colors. Superman is just red, blue, yellow. But the palette of Watchmen is all oranges and purples and greens, secondary colors.
Yes.
It looks like subdued. It looks kind of it feels like an otherworldly vision of what a comic book universe should be. God bless you if we actually got you to pick up this book for the first time. I wish I was you. You're going to be like so amazed. But fuck, man, that twist.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
God, it's like the fucking best.
It's so good.
So fucking good.
It's so good.
Ah!
And the
Oh, also Ozymandias' cute cat.
Yeah.
Babu?
Boobastis.
Boobastis. Oh, Boobastis.
Come, Boobastis.
it just
Marcus, I'm so glad you're sitting with us on this episode.
and just another I just want to throw out another example of like the crazy attention to detail and the crazy playfulness with form that went into this. There's one issue that's called Dark Symmetry, I believe, and the whole thing, almost the look of the whole thing is almost like a palindrome. The way that they organized it kind of reads so that you go into the center and back out visually, if that makes any sense. So they're just playing with form left and right. And the that ending and the twist you're kind of referring to was heavily influenced by an Outer Limits episode called The Architects of Fear, which I would love to go back and check out.
The way I read it is it was parallel thinking or like unintentional, but Alan Moore just copped up and just said, oh, like in the script, it says, I guess it's like an episode of something from Outer Limits once someone because they were pushing him to change it once the
editor was.
Yeah. And he was like, I don't think so, but whatever.
Right.
There's actually, we might get into it, but it's Alan Moore does not like being called a plagiarist.
Yes.
He takes it quite personally.
I mean, is there much more to say about The Watchmen?
Without going too deep into it, even the motion comic didn't suck that much.
Yeah.
It's
True. I guess I can say that it was the impetus for his falling out with DC Comics in the end. There was a big dispute about the rights. Some sources say they only got 2% of the profits of The Watchmen. DC tried to, I think, sell some, like, I bet there were smiley face buttons. I believe
that was it.
And they tried to weasel their way out of giving them profits for that. And then they just had this giant falling out, and DC retained the rights. And then they tried to pull some shit years later. I mean, it does seem like, I know Alan Moore's like kind of a bonkers dude, I could safely say, but at the same time, it really does sound like he got pretty shafted by DC. And years later, they were like, "We'll give you the rights back if you write a prequel and a sequel to The Watchmen." Which, first of all, I think what's funny to me is like all the marketing around The Watchmen, all the toys and the buttons, and it just sort of, it feels like it just goes against everything that The Watchmen is really about. It's kind of funny to try to turn that into a hokey superhero franchise, you know?
The story of Alan Moore is basically the story of a man who looked at the comic book landscape and said, "Oh, this is all a bit rubbish, isn't it? This is just a holdover form of entertainment for 12-year-old boys that somehow still exists after the 1960s. I'm gonna tear it all down." And then after he tries to tear it all down, the fan response is like, yay, more comic books, more entertainment for 9-year-old boys.
And it inspired a lot of work that he himself was kind of unhappy that he inspired. So really just sort of...
A man by the name of Grant Morrison comes to mind with Alan Moore. Alan Moore does not enjoy my boy Grant.
Just went on like one 15,000-word screed against him. That's it. The man goes on hundreds of thousand-word screeds.
Yeah, hundreds of that, and just only manages to shoehorn it into any interview that he does. Just, boy, both of them. They're just constantly at odds. That's my favorite feud. It's literally two magicians fighting each other.
Oh, man, I smell a future episode, favorite feuds.
They should just sit in the middle of a Scottish glen high on LSD trying to explode each other's heads, scanner style.
They're the same person. They just can't stand what they see in each other because it resonates so much. It's probably what it is.
No, Alan Moore's a gruff old man in his 60s while, Grant Morrison is a spry young man in his 50s. It's a generational divide.
Oh, boy, yeah, that is just one of the most biting insults I've ever heard. It's Alan Moore calling Grant Morrison a Scottish cover band of his work.
We covered that last episode.
That is brutal. That is legitimately brutal.
We did cover that last episode, but burn is so good.
It bears repeating. That burn is so good that it bears repeating.
I felt the burn all over again.
Yeah.
That is rough.
So Watchmen came out and it transformed the comic book industry because now people here's the thing though is that Alan Moore is like, wouldn't it be like we've reached the outer limits of a superhero story,
pun intended.
We've broken it down, we've tried to make them as human as possible, and when you do that the tropes fall apart. Superheroes fall apart when you give them that much drama and relationships and baggage and awareness. But instead of kind of learning from that lesson and being like, oh yeah, comics should aspire to more, all the publishers basically were like, okay, so Batman needs to fuck and Spider-Man needs to
addiction
it brought about what many called the dark age of comics, which then launched Image Comics and made everything extreme and everything was just jagged and raw.
I mean, and to be fair, video games, everything went through this grunge music, it all went through this it's kind of interesting how it all sort of pushed into I'm so glad we're not in the fucking late 90s anymore. I
mean, we got our own Margaret Thatcher coming, so Margaret fucking Thatcher with her fucking fascist ass.
Yeah, that thought definitely has gone through my mind in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, fucking Margaret Thatcher, fucking racist, xenophobic. Fucking hell, man.
So I guess we should mention before we move on from the DC years, The Killing Joke, which I know we mentioned in the last episode.
Alan Moore repeatedly claims it's one of his least favorite works,
which is kind of crazy to me. And even you were talking about how it's better visually than it is. But when I first read that thing, I just absolutely loved it. I just thought it was just a wonderful little short. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe it just it was okay. I was okay with it for what it was. Which was just a lovely short piece about Batman and exploring the sort of basic nature of the relationship between Joker and the Batman. But yeah, Alan Moore kind of talked shit about it. He said, it was something that I thought was clumsy, misjudged, and had no real human importance. It was just about a couple of licensed DC characters that didn't really relate to the real world in any way. And also, he regrets crippling Barbara Gordon. He said, I spoke to Lynn Wine, who was our editor on the project. He said, yeah, okay, cripple the bitch. It was probably one of the areas where they should have reined me in, but they didn't.
In the animated movie release that happened just this year, they not only crippled the bitch, they were like, fuck it. They added that to the story. It was just oh, by the way, Batman and the teenage daughter of his best friend boned on rooftops in costume, which is such that's the thing is that whole story, okay, it's cool to see Batman be that raw and twisted, but do we need Batman to be raw and twisted?
Right. Doesn't he live by a law? Isn't it that and that the kind of the
but
important...
the art is so good. Brian Boland's art is so good.
Wonderful.
it can't,
beautiful.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to mention that Boland was inspired by the German expressionist Paul Linney's film The Man Who Laughs, which I'm very interested to go back and watch if that was his visual inspiration.
This also marks another time that Alan Moore had a runaway hit that he saw very little like actual financial benefit from.
Really?
And this was during a time when comic book artists across the industry were kind of raising a ruckus for more rights, for more creators' rights. That ultimately kind of manifested in Image Comics, which was just all the top-tier talents at Marvel at the time, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Wilt.
Todd McFarlane.
I was going to say Wilt Portasio.
Several people have been requesting Image, Spawn, specifically Spawn, and Todd McFarlane episodes, so we'll be doing all three soon, Jim.
Yeah.
And there was also Eric Larson that did Savage Dragon.
Yes.
I
loved Savage Dragon.
Savage Dragon. Mark Silvestri was also part of that crew.
And
Jim Valentino.
So from that,
Just ripped green muscles. That dragon was huge. And Bedrock.
Oh, Bedrock.
No, Bedrock, I think you mean Badrock.
Badrock.
He was originally called Bedrock in Youngblood #1, but then Hanna-Barbera sued them, and
so they
he
changed
had
it to
to change
Badrock.
it to Badrock.
I think I have that Youngblood. Either way.
And like the character.
I think it has to be worth at least $6,000 by now.
Oh, really?
No,
Yeah.
not.
No, because I got all those comics. I was like, I'm going to be a millionaire. My brother was like, you got to get all these comic books. I was like, I got them all. I got the first Savage Dragon. I've got the first Spawn.
I have the entire run of Exo Manowar and an underground bunker protected by armed guards. And believe me, I am several $100,000 in debt.
I have the classic crossover episode or issue with Savage Dragon and Badrock. That's a killer one right there.
Right now, you can get Youngblood #1, mint condition.
For?
$3.61.
We're in the money. We're in the money. We got a lot of So Alan Moore was, even though he had sworn off DC Comics, he collaborated with a lot of these individual creators, especially because they offered actual rights to the characters they created.
Right. But of course, before he goes to Image.
Oh, shit, I jumped the gun?
Big period of time there. Alan Moore, his wife Phyllis, and his mutual lover, Deborah Delano.
Deborah Delano is just the official name of the third wheel in a polyamorous
Double
relationship.
D's, baby. They set up their own comics publishing company called Mad Love. And they did an anthology of work speaking out about Thatcher. And it particularly
did a lot of good.
It did a bunch of good. Her Clause 28, preventing councils and schools from promoting homosexuality. But also some big things came out of this. There was also Taboo, a comics anthology, which featured work by artists such as Neil Gaiman, and it's also where we found our first little snippets of what would become From Hell and The Lost Girls, both. And also, I really want to mention this because I want to get other people to read it because I want to go out to the store and read it myself. Have you guys heard of A Small Killing?
No.
It was
I've heard of it.
It was a short story in comic book form he made about a once idealistic advertising executive haunted by his boyhood self. It looks really interesting. I looked at some of the kind of individual pages from it, and some say it's his most underrated work. It looks really chilling.
My buddy Jason, who's like an Alan Moore freak, constantly talks about it.
Yeah,
he says
he
says that it's just fantastic.
I gotta read it. So let's talk about From Hell. I think it may compete with The Watchmen for me personally as my favorite Alan Moore masterwork. I really think it is absolutely brilliant. I did have the opportunity to read it in London. We used the map in the back of the of my graphic novel to go around and check out all the different murder scenes. That's a dangerous part of town still, so I wouldn't recommend doing that, especially at night.
I was only there a couple of weeks ago. It was fine. I got some curry.
Yeah, no, man.
Brick Lane.
I went to Brick Lane. Yeah,
Brick Lane.
Walk around Whitechapel with a murder boner and just see what happens.
Yeah, there was a one-legged homeless man who was hobbling after me, yelling at me to give him some change to buy him a tea. He's like, Pour me a cup of tea. Pour me a cup of tea.
I'm from the past. I'm from the 1800s.
It's adorable that you actually.
That is a true story. That did actually happen.
That's amazing.
It's
One like
adorable
a
that
British homeless man.
Sure, and that wasn't a Masonic agent meant to do psyops against you. Sure.
So, some things to know about From Hell. It was about 10 years in the making. It was based on Stephen Knight's theory that the Jack the Ripper murders were part of a conspiracy to conceal the birth of an illegitimate royal baby fathered by Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. It's deep. The amount of notes. And what's great, too, is you can see the amount of notes, because in the back of the book, it features over 40 pages of page-by-page notes and references and just different things. I remember I was living at the time near the British Library, and in the back, there were certain books that he used for his research that could only be found in the British Library. I mean, it was just a very intense, in-depth, and it was a mixture. It definitely wasn't like, this is fact. It was a sort of half fiction, half historic, half my conspiracy theory retelling of who Jack the Ripper could have been. And it's also really fascinating. Like, he said it was inspired in part by the one of Douglas Adams' novels entitled Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, in that it explores the notion that to solve a crime historically, one would need to solve the entire society in which it occurred. And the Jack the Ripper murders involved lots of different people. Aleister Crowley makes an appearance, Winston Churchill. You've just got all these bizarre connections to famous authors and painters, and all these people are bizarrely connected and tied to this fucked up happening that happened in London during that time. And it's just kind of like completely mind blowing.
I mean, I mean, he's like hemmed and hawed on whether or not his version of the events are the actual events, but it was more an exploration of this grim event that kind of, in his mind, ushered in the modern mindset, which is why he brings in all these thinkers and all these beliefs and all these ideas. I mean, by the end of the book, it becomes like this weird mystical tableau of like ancient gods and philosophical ideas. It's way less about who stabbed what in the where.
But it almost more about the people searching that out, trying to uncover all these things and trying to piece all these different scraps together to try to find the truth somehow. It's got a deeper meaning almost to seeking truth than almost anything else. He referred to the people who were trying to solve the crime as, I believe they were the goal catchers, like seagull catchers, and he kept depicting them as these men with big nets, swinging these big nets around in the wind, just trying to pick up any little thing they could and put it all together. And it's just this wonderful, infinite mystery who this murderer was, and if it even was one person. And, it's got a lot of, I think you can make a lot of connections to the Zodiac Killer and people's obsession with that serial killer in a lot of ways, especially with like the amount of different letters that were involved. Of course, the title From Hell is based on the opening of the From Hell letter, which they do believe was written by the actual killer.
It's the only one that they can actually prove is written by the killer.
And it has all these bizarre, weird things going on with it. It's almost a code within itself. It's got these weird misspellings that people think were done on purpose. It's just got little things like that, kind of like the Zodiac did, that just is purposefully like throwing off, trying to throw off everybody at every different angle and pass.
Also, it was a occultist attempt to stave off the female takeover of the world.
Yes, of course. Always is. But we know that. We talked about that at our secret meeting yesterday. And we'll talk about that at our secret meeting tomorrow night. Oh, God, the fucking Johnny Depp movie, please help me. That's the funny thing is like looking at all the movies. I mean, we're going to talk about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen soon. I mean, it is just such a trap. If I were Alan Moore, I too would be like, yeah, fuck Hollywood. No one's making movies out of this stuff. And I would make the case, too, that he's very much like when people talk about, there's no way to adapt Catcher in the Rye to a film, and it shouldn't be done. And I think that's true with Alan Moore's work. I mean, it's just it's a purely, I think that's the mark of a great artist too, that you really can't adapt it. It's just he's so connected to the form that you can't just package it in a different way that easily. I mean, it's just not going to work.
I'm going to butcher the quote of his, but he famously will repeat this, that if comics highest ideal is to just be turned into a movie, then comics will never be anything worthy. They'll just be movies that don't move.
Yeah, they're just what do you call it when the person
Storyboard.
Thank you. God damn it. I'm like, I know this word. It's a word I know. Me make movies. Me make many movies.
You make many movies?
Me make 4 movies. Me make 4 to 5 movies. All right.
You got a lot of spunk, kid. I'll buy that picture.
And I mean, just case in point with From Hell, the illustrations it's so connected to the material. It's this scrappy kind of pencil drawing sort of on paper. It just really, oh man, it just makes the world. The illustration style and approach. I forget who the illustrator is offhand. I don't have it written down, but it's just so perfect for what that story is, for filthy old London. It just has that look. It's just like pencil scribblings.
Eddie Campbell,
man, it's so well done. So,
and he's worked with Eddie Campbell on a lot of like smaller projects throughout the years too. Yeah,
it just is perfect for that story.
His weirder shit that no one read,
right?
Like, just like we're like, what was it called? Like he did a snake thing with Eddie Campbell. I know.
Well, speaking of weird shit that nobody read, The Lost Girls. Oh. I own it, and it was $75, and it actually sold out like day up.
It made waves. It was like a big deal. People were covering this as like a weird ribald like. I feel like that was like back in a day where a particularly sexy book still made headlines in America.
Right. Well, he wanted to sort of give a deeper weight and a deeper sort of meaning to the form of pornography. It was set in 1913. We've got all the gals are there. Alice from Alice in Wonderland, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and Wendy from Peter Pan. But he sort of repurposes those stories, such as with Dorothy, the tornado comes through her town, and she's holed up in her house, and she ends up just rubbing on it.
All right.
And then she has this crazy and sees all this crazy stuff, and then has sex with a bunch of farmhands that like are representative of the Tin Man and the yada yada yada. You've got Wendy meets a homeless boy named Peter Pan. He shows her how to bone zone, and then they go to the park with a bunch of other fun boys, and then they sort of keep doing fun stuff,
pawing at her,
and
then a crocodile eats one of them.
Yeah, a crocodile eats one of them. But there's also some really heavy shit going on in there. I mean, there's a lot of rape. There's a lot of just very deep sort of the molestation, and they definitely deal with all types of different sex.
Stop, you're getting me so hot. There's such a sexy book.
It was such a weird book to read. I mean, at that point I was like, Alan Moore, #1. I will get anything he makes, even if it's a $75 giant like hardback fairy tale book filled with like pussies with like a opium smoking caterpillar on them and stuff like that. We're going there, right? I'm gonna go where he goes. I will follow him. The song, I listen to that every time I would read The Lost Girls. So but
that is a weird masturbation ritual, I'm not gonna lie.
Illustrated with his lover Melinda Gebbie. You definitely get a sense that it was sort of made by two people who were just banging like hounds. And it was a weird book to read because I was bizarrely turned on, and then also kind of like icked out, and then also like it was written really well, and they used his history, like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand happens while they're at this hotel in Paris and weird shit like that they tie in, again taking historic formats. This time it is sort of fairy tale ladies. It is like girls from sort of different works of literature and fiction and stuff like that, mixed with these historical things, and then just also hardcore bone zoning. So
now, would you recommend this as either literature or pornography?
I would say that I would like to read it again. That is what I would say.
I'm looking at some pictures online. I'm saying intense. Pornography. It looks pretty good.
It's good. It's good. I would like to read it again. I don't know if I actually finished it, which is kind of messed up because I paid all that money for it. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting experiment. I think it's worthy. I think it's art. I definitely think it's art. I think it's courageous and interesting to check that out. And at the same time, it does beg the question. Can you make art out of pornography? And
yes.
Yeah, I guess so.
There's,
it's virulent from you looking at the pictures.
There is no such thing as an ironic boner. I will say, I feel like the two are inexorably separated.
And people were, especially because the it's dealing with.
I laughed. I came.
It's dealing with like young girls going through having a lot of sexual experiences. There definitely was some outcry, and some people wanted to ban it and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was fine. It sold like crazy. It did very well. And Moore says the reason for that is that he said if we had come out and said, well, this is a work of art, they would have probably all said, no, it's not. It's pornography. So because we're saying this is pornography, they're saying, no, it's not. It's art. And people don't realize quite what they've said. So I love that statement. I think that is such a brilliant, brilliant thing to say. Say like, no, this is just dirty, stuff. And then everybody rallies in the opposite way. Mainstream media.
Lame stream.
I just wish Alan Moore's vision that we can enter a world where just grown adults can just openly read pornographic comic books out in public transportation like Tokyo.
Actually, a friend of mine accidentally did that. She bought Lost Girls like the day it came out. Like we were working at Midtown Comics together.
Oh, yeah.
And she bought it, and she was a huge Alan Moore fan, so she got on the train, and it's like 3 volumes.
Yes.
And she pulled it out and started reading it, but it was late at night, so no one was sitting next to her. But she didn't look at the back cover of the volumes, and all 3 volumes have just like hardcore fucking like all over. And she thought why? Like she was like, why is that woman and her child looking at me so weird while I'm reading this? And then when she got home, she took it out. It's like, oh, I'm terrible.
Thanks a lot, lady. Now I got to explain what vulvas are to my
So after that, as one does when they write a pornographic comic book series, Alan Moore declared himself a ceremonial magician, and
he claimed it was a drunken boast on his 40th birthday,
and moved back to mainstream comics via Image Comics. So, on becoming a ceremonial magician, it was actually inspired by From Hell. He said there was one word balloon in From Hell that completely hijacked my life. This is in his words. A character says something like, the one place gods inarguably exist is in the human mind. After I wrote that, I realized I'd accidentally made a true statement. And now I'd have to rearrange my entire life around it. I love how he inspires himself because no one else can inspire him.
I was listening to an interview where he quoted the historical figure John Dee, who was this mathematician and astrologer and scientist in Queen Elizabeth's
He was a magician.
He was a magician. But this was during those like heady days.
He was a magician!
It was when sorcerer and scientist weren't separate jobs yet. And so he admired this guy so much that he thought to himself, well, if he can believe in magic and he is a genius who shaped history, then, there might be something to this. And he then describes a series of experiences with LSD where he just met demons. And the more he immersed himself in it, the more he truly believed it. And listening to him talk about it, it reminds me a lot of what you've done, Marcus, on Last Podcast on the Left. And just the idea, he'll just get into these zones where it's really fascinating to listen to a talk, just be like, the world of the imagination is real to the conscious mind, just as real as anything real can be. And words are the vessel through which the imagination enters the real world. And when you think of a sorcerer, he uses spells, and a spell is how you form words. You spell it out. Therefore, words have power. Words can change the outside world.
He said, I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether that be music, writing, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Art is, like magic, the science of manipulating symbols, words, or images to achieve changes in consciousness. Marcus, is that correct?
You can call anything magic.
And he said that, well, you know what? It's still, I think it works.
The new Whopperito at Burger King is literally magic.
It's a Whopper Burger King magic, Marcus, that we're saying right now? Unbelievable.
That's what you do. Yeah, that's what you do. You know, you make your perception into your reality, and he's absolutely doing it.
And on the LSD thing too, I have a funny quote for that. It said in some of his early magic rituals, he's using mind-altering psychedelic drugs. He said, in his words, "It's frightening. You call out the names in this strange, incomprehensible language, and you're looking into the glass, and there appears to be this little man talking to you. It just works." And of course, his primary deity is the ancient Roman snake god Glycon. So, you know, he's been doing a lot of work. He's been really digging in there.
There's a sock in there, too, I think.
Is there a bit of a sock situation?
Yeah.
He also throws in a lot of Kabbalah. There's like a lot of Kabbalah stuff, which like is so weird and bad.
And Aleister Crowley. He accepted the ideas from Crowley's religion, Thelema. Can you speak towards this a little bit?
Yeah.
Thelema, about true will being connected to the will of the pantheistic universe.
Yeah. I mean, that's... wait a second. What does he say about it again?
It says... He accepted ideas from Crowley's religion, Thelema, about true will being connected to the will of the pantheistic universe.
Yeah, I guess what he's talking about there is that if you use your own will, you can manifest certain deities, throughout. Like you can choose pretty much any deity. Like say you can choose Set, like the Egyptian god Set. You can bring in Set's energy, use it for your own purposes, and use the force of will to get pretty much whatever you want.
Oh, yeah. I mean, another big thing you got to know about Alan Moore. Dude hates monotheists.
Yeah, yeah, he's really...
Fucking just the...
Mono anything. Having sex with one woman, being in one religion, staying with one publisher.
Hollywood producers and monotheists form the dark triangle that has haunted Alan Moore's life his entire life.
So around 1993, Moore decided to go back into comic books with Image, which we kind of touched on a little while earlier. He did an issue of Spawn. He did another little piece called 1963, which was an homage to the Silver Age of American comics. Which have you ever checked that out? Not good.
No, it's media. It's really mediocre.
This is when he kind of hit a weird wall, and he said that after I'd done the 1963 stuff, I'd become aware of how much the comic audience had changed while I'd been away. That all of a sudden it seemed that the bulk of the audience really wanted things that had almost no story. Just lots of big, full-page pin-up sort of pieces of artwork, and I was genuinely interested to see if I could write a decent story in that market. Now, you guys remember that time. I think that's the time when I was sort of getting into comic books, and it was sort of about choosing a book by its cover back then. I would just pick up whatever
hologram foil cover,
crazy ass hologram X-Men covers and stuff like that.
Well, the big thing that he did then was he did a 3-issue miniseries featuring the Violator character from Spawn.
Love it.
Man, if his goal was to like make 13-year-olds go fucking awesome, then he did it because
it was
cool because the whole plot was Violators, like 5 brothers from, the 7th circle of hell have decided that it's time for Violator to die. And so it's just, these like big gigantic demons just wrecking ass all throughout Earth, killing people and getting all weird with it while trying to find Violator, and Violator getting all weird with it and like opening up people's skin and like hiding inside other people's bodies and making like really stupid that's the thing.
How many fat clowns?
Huh?
How many fat clowns are in this series?
I mean, well, the main character is a fat clown.
Oh, good.
The fat clown, yeah. And I went back and read it, and not too long ago. It was like in college when I went back and read it. Like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
It's really
definitely
it is atrociously bad
because
because
the darkest
Alan
period
Moore
in his
is
creative
not
work.
that funny.
Yeah.
Right.
He cannot write a joke to save his life.
And a lot of that stuff was hinged on a dark humor.
Yeah, and that's
especially
what,
the Violator.
And I think that's what he was trying to do is like because
You're telling
really,
me the lead singer of the Sinister Ducks had a shitty sense of humor? Check out last episode for some clips of the Sinister Ducks.
I mean, the art is rad as fuck, in like the full-on 90s term. Like, it's really violent. It's really gruesome and bloody. But the writing is, like, I mean, just atrociously bad. It's like he tried writing bad dialogue.
I wonder if that could have been the reason why Image partner Jim Lee went to Moore and said, all right, I'm going to give you your own imprint with America's Best Comics, and maybe try to sort of force him to get back to his roots, get back to what he was great at.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it is amazing that this period of time where he's trying to appeal to the modern aesthetics kind of gave birth to this new wave of Alan Moore comics where it's very much about throwback.
Yes, with, of course, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which, man, don't let the movie keep you from enjoying getting into that comic book series. It is one of my oh my god, that's the crazy thing.
Whoa! The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie is fantastic if you are actively high on speed and doing something else.
Oh my god, it's the comic book is just this perfect sort of mishmash of all these different characters from specifically British literature,
Victorian
right?
British heroes. Alan Quatermain, the Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Mina Harkin from Dracula.
Yep.
They throw these like by that time in
Captain Nemo.
Captain Nemo.
By this time in history, Sherlock Holmes was dead, but he casts a large shadow over the proceedings. They fight
War of the Worlds.
There's like War of the Worlds, Fu Manchu, and Kevin O'Neill, I believe is the artist's name, imbues it with this very unique energy.
So great.
There's all this flavored text of Victorian era advertisements. It's really good and really entertaining. I got to, as far as the Black Dossier, and things got a little wiggly woggly.
Mm-hmm. But specifically, those first two trades, are like immaculate.
Yeah. And it's violent and funny, and you learn something. Like, it'll send you into a deep Wikipedia hole because every incidental named character is from somewhere.
Again, like Watchmen, in the sense that it's just filled with tiny little details, tiny little references to other things. Did you guys read Tom Strong?
A couple of issues.
A few issues. It was the weakest one out of them all.
Postmodern superhero series featured a hero inspired by characters predating Superman, such as Doc Savage and Tarzan.
It was
Science
fine.
heroes, Buck Rogers. There was this whole like Ubermenschian like archetype.
So it's
It was like an adventure comic.
it's like League in a sense that it mishmashed different.
Kind of, sort of.
Huh.
I mean,
High adventure, kind of fantastical science heroes.
more like pulp magazines.
Yeah, that's absolutely. It's literally.
It's just pulp magazines.
And I know
but like jungle adventure pulp magazines.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I know I mentioned earlier how much it excites me when people say, "Hey, the podcast got me to pick something up." And I think if this podcast gets anyone to pick anything up, I would hope it would be top 10. I love top 10. It's
Hold and fill
so
time.
damn
I have
good.
to change my pants for a specific reason. Whatever you do, don't mention the name of that comic book again.
In a world that where everyone is a superhero, all the cops and villains and everybody has a secret identity and all this sort of thing.
Tights, costume, and you're like wondering like how does that even exist as a society? They just start with that premise and just evolve it.
Yeah.
Everyone from the hot dog vendor in like spandex heating up hot dogs with his heat vision on the street to just like every criminal and employee. There's
God, the illustrations are wild.
Yeah.
Gene Ha and Xander Cannon in amazingly detailed artwork. I'm sorry, but so in a city where literally everybody is a costume superhero, we follow the 10th Precinct.
Yes. this sort of the guys trying to kind of hold it all together as they deal with sort of mysteries happening.
It's a cop drama.
Yeah.
It's a cop drama, and the head sergeant is a dog
Named Hyperdog.
A talking dog named Hyperdog in a metal man suit.
I love it.
And he's like the best character.
He's awesome.
There's so many good characters.
so many good characters.
Definitely influenced by TV shows. Specifically, he cited Hill Street Blues as an influence for this comic book. It's just such just awesome like detective stories. It's just fucking so well done.
Yeah, really great murder story. Really great murder mysteries.
In this incredibly detailed and realized future world.
Yeah, but it's not just like murder mysteries either. Like there's one of the most heartbreaking ones is there's a teleportation accident.
Oh, issue 8.
Yeah, issue 8. Yeah.
Many people list this as one of the single greatest issues of comics ever.
I'd be up there with that. Yeah.
The creator of True Detective.
Really?
If you rewatch the last episode of True Detective, Russ goes into an entire tirade about light and darkness.
Yeah.
That is basically word for word from Top 10 number 8.
Oh, wow. Shit.
The light and the dark.
Yeah.
Before there was darkness, we're winning. Like it's
awesome.
fucking from that book.
Oh, fuck!
Yeah!
Dude, I knew when I heard that. I loved it when I said, but I was like, I think I've heard something like that before.
New
I've been
pants for
trying
the
to
whole
place
crew.
that for 2 years. I'm trying to place that for 2 years where that's from. It's from the dying horse.
Don't let the words dying horse sway you. It's a very important.
It's from the gigantic dying horseman.
Space horse.
The gigantic space horseman. That's who it's from.
It's
Just so much insane, ridiculous shit. Giving so many deeper meanings and truths to you.
Yeah.
That you're just like, how are you capable of this level of storytelling?
Well, there's a teleportation incident that is completely and totally senseless, and one of these cops that is essentially like a beat cop has to go and talk to a guy as he's dying. Like he's caught in between this, like he's caught in a teleportation like space game between space horses, and this guy is, he's dying slowly, and the cop has to go and like pretty much hold his hand as he's dying.
Which is, if you're a cop, car accidents are a huge part of your job detail that people don't really, it doesn't make its way into pop culture a lot.
Yeah,
you end up being with people during their last moments. Quite a bit.
And the world of Top 10 has like all these different like subtleties to it. Like science-based superheroes have like higher status there, while robotics-based heroes and magic-based heroes are treated as like second-class citizens. There's all these intertwining cases. Like you follow this, this group of detectives, and like they'll be following one case and then passing off the workload to another one, and the way they intertwine kind of mix and match in various ways. The art is gorgeous. It's up there with Watchmen, with V for Vendetta.
Absolutely.
It should stand as a separate pillar of Alan Moore's creative prowess.
And it's just like two trades. I didn't read
the 49ers.
Yeah,
it's really good.
I didn't read 49ers. I didn't read Smacks.
Smacks.
Smacks
Yeah.
is the name of the.
Smacks is okay. But it's disappointing.
Yeah.
a lot of incest.
A lot of incest, and it's like more of a fantasy story than anything. And
it's more
I was
about-
kind of like, why are you doing this instead of writing more top 10?
Right.
This seems like it was extremely self-indulgent.
So just pick up those two trades. Just the
and if you
and
like those two
49ers,
trades, if you like the two trades, buy 49ers.
which is like a prequel.
It's a prequel,
Yeah. Gotcha.
But top 10 is fucking phenomenal.
good.
Phenomenal.
Now I never read Promethea, but that's his sort of cult comic book.
It's also very good.
He wanted to sort of, he said, I wanted to be able to do an occult comic that didn't portray the occult as a dark and scary place, because that's not my experience of it. So Promethea was this sort of psychedelic, sophisticated,
Again,
experimental.
paired with an amazing artist in J.H. Williams III, who ended up working on the Batwoman Detective Comics runs. Very intricate page designs and, heretofore unseen panel layouts, and of course, lots and lots of dialogue balloons where just one character explains some ancient bullshit.
A lot.
So that pretty much wraps up. Really, kind of brings us up to today. Since 2009, he left around 05, 06 or so, he left the comics industry, the mainstream comics industry. In 09, he became a panelist on the BBC Radio 4 program, The Infinite Monkey Cage. And he started an underground magazine in 2010 called Dodgem Logic, which features work by Northampton-based authors and artists. I thought it was a really beautiful full circle for him.
Oh, he is still obsessed with Northampton. It's been the novel Jerusalem, which I don't know if we talked about last time.
No.
It came out this year. It is a War and Peace level, huge tome.
Yeah, my roommate just got it. He actually just showed it to me yesterday. It's a beautiful printing, but it is huge.
Yeah.
It follows the city of Northampton from ancient times to the modern day with kind of Joycean, like weird chapter jumps from character to character.
That's awesome.
Entire chapters he'll just write in verse instead of prose. It apparently took him 10 years, and he would find himself intellectually broken and having to put it down and then bring it back again.
Man, so crazy. I mean, just the fact that I haven't even barely touched the surface of some of that stuff. Just
Also,
blows
he
my
hates computers and thinks the government is bad.
And 2011, he did his last issue of Neonomicon, which is his Lovecraft universe stuff. And in 2016, more confirmed, he's authoring a final League book, League of Legends, and or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, League of Legends, and one more Lovecraft work before retiring from comics to enter filmmaking.
Yeah, he already has some shorts made. He's very excited about that.
Wow.
I haven't watched them. I couldn't find them online. But yeah, he's still like a gadabout. He's still like...
He's working on an occult textbook also called The Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I'll buy that.
So I think there you have it, Jake. That's the life and times of Mr. Alan Moore up to date.
Fucking cool dude, man. He's just a goddamn cool dude that makes cool things. He's been in my headspace now. I'm really tempted to pick up Jerusalem if it weren't for the fact that I now have to read a bunch of more shit ever since we started this goddamn research-based podcast.
Yeah.
Oh boy, more learning, I yell every day as I wake up.
Yeah, welcome to the life.
Man, yeah, I want to go back and reread Watchmen, reread Top 10. So, yeah, I hope everybody who listens to this does the same. I hope that gets you to get out there and get your reading pants on and don't shit in them for once.
I ruined my reading pants earlier this podcast.
So anyways, this has been The Wizard and the Bruiser. Please rate and review or rate and review on iTunes. We're on these streets. I'm my PlayStation Network tag is Catcher6945 if you want to play some Overwatch. I'm picking up Pokemon Sun real soon here. And what else? I'm on Twitch.tv under Holdnator's Ho. Jake?
You can follow me on Twitter at BestJakeYoung, and if you go onto the Dorkly YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dorkly, you can find me playing Dungeons and Dragons with audience suggestions. So my wizard Chris Sandwich fought hand in hand with the barbarian warrior Johnny Foreskin. It turned out it was a real good adventure, and you can see the character Jared that I've been working on for Dorkly in his first solo video, where I yell about anime for 4 minutes.
Fantastic. Good night. And good luck.
What?
For more shows like the one you just listened to, go to cavecomedyradio.com.